Well, hello everyone. I hope you are enjoying every day August. If you are, please feel free to share my channel with other people, other bookish people in your life, and spread the news. Today we are doing my July wrap up. I read 9 books in July, and for the most part, they were pretty darn good. We're gonna start out today on a high and move our way to the one that I didn't like. Ooh, let's begin with The Final Girls Support Group by Grady Hendrix. I ended up loving this. I gave it 5 stars. I will say, if I had to choose between the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, which is my favorite horror book of all time, and this, I would choose that. That's still holy grail for me. But this follows a group of women who are all final girls, which means that they, in one way or another, survived an ordeal, a massacre, and they were the last people standing. And over the course of many years, they have stuck together and literally have a little support group. They meet, I think, every month and talk about their feelings. And things come to a head when someone is out there trying to bring down the final girls. I thought this was so much fun. Honestly, what I love about Grady Hendrix is that he is so funny. You are laughing at one point and then you go into these dark, dark places. When you realize what happened to each of these women and the descriptions of what they survived, they are horrifying scenes. But I will say I didn't find this nearly as scary as the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, or as gruesome. But I really did enjoy this. I think Grady Hendrix is definitely a feminist. I was listening to Stephanie's podcast, Books in the Freezer, and she interviewed him, and they were talking about final girls in books and why he wrote this book. And he was talking about how, a lot of the time when you watch movies about final girls, it's very much like they just happen to survive, and he doesn't think that they go into enough detail about the difficulties of being the last one standing and how that impacts their lives in the long run. And this really explores that. It's funny, it's scary, and I just had a blast reading this, honestly. Just a joyful, joyful ride. Another book that I loved was The Other Bennett Sister by Janice Howdlow. I listened to this on audio, and I so highly recommend listening to this on audio. This is about Mary from Pride and Prejudice. Yes, it follows the Bennett sisters, but we are specifically following Mary, who in Pride and Prejudice, she's kind of the middle sister who's very serious and doesn't seem to have a lot of prospects for getting married. And I fell in love with Mary. I liked her so much. Of course, you get a little bit of a glimpse of Elizabeth and Jane and the other Bennett sisters, and Mrs. Bennett is just as annoying as she ever was in Pride and Prejudice. But to me, this is the best spin-off that I've read. It really felt like Jane Austen took Mary's story and wrote it. It feels like we missed a whole book by Jane Austen, but it's really Janice Howdlow, and I was so blown away by how she wrote this. I loved that you follow Mary from a young child right until, after many of the sisters are married, all of the sisters are married, and what their lives are like and what her life is like. And I just adored it. I also loved her connection with Mrs. Hill, who was the maid at the Bennett family home, and I just was completely hooked. I could not stop listening to this. I would find excuses to sneak away and listen. I listened to it while I was cleaning. I so highly recommend that you listen to The Other Bennett Sister. I need to buy that one because it was just incredible. So obviously I gave that one 5 stars. now we are moving into my 4-star reads. The first is The Twisted Ones by T. Kingfisher. This is a horror book about a woman whose grandmother dies. And she was not a nice woman by any stretch of the imagination, not nice at all. But her father is quite elderly and he can't go to the home to like clean up and get rid of stuff. And so she agrees to go and do that. And her grandmother lived kind of far out in the middle of nowhere. And she goes and realizes, oh my goodness, my grandmother turned into a bit of a hoarder. So as she's going through the stuff, she stumbles upon some journals that her step-grandfather wrote. And he had died, you know, quite a few years before her grandmother died. And she had fond memories of him, but didn't really know him well. And she gets to know him in this series of journals. And as she's reading them, she's like, ooh, it sounds like he was kind of going crazy at the end of his life, because there are all of these references to things out in the woods. And she's like, oh, he lost his mind. It's so sad. But as she starts to explore the woods in the area and things start happening that are similar to the stuff in the journals, she realizes, oh my goodness, maybe he wasn't crazy after all. And I'm like, how quickly can I get out of here? What I loved about this was it was really funny, like genuinely hilarious. I laugh out loud, but also very creepy. She brings her trusty dog along, and if you don't fall in love with this dog, you have no heart. Like, he's wonderful. I loved Bongo. And also I found some of the scenes quite creepy. So yeah, I really ended up enjoying The Twisted Ones. Next is The House Opposite by Barbara Noble. This was kindly sent to me by Judy. Thank you again, Judy, so much. I ended up really enjoying this book. This is a World War II historical fiction book about a woman living in London during, you know, the bombings of London. And she is having an affair with a married man. She herself is single, but her boss is married and she's fallen in love with him, and it's about her relationship with him. It also follows a neighbor of hers, a younger man. And what I loved about this was that it was a real glimpse of what London would have been like during the Blitz. Barbara Noble herself actually lived in London during the Blitz, so she understands how it worked. And what has always impressed me about books about the Blitz is the resilience of Londoners, the resilience of the English people, and also it's interesting how quickly you can become accustomed to your surroundings and what is going on. Like, these people are being bombed at night, and it talks about how some people decide to, you know, go into the underground to seek shelter, and others decide to just, you know, wait it out at home. And I found it so interesting that people can get so used to it. I really ended up liking this. I liked the characters. I thought it was super interesting. I really liked our main character a lot. And yeah, I loved reading about Barbara Noble's perspective about something that she lived through. I definitely want to read more by her. I heard about her from Jen Campbell. You can always rely on Jen Campbell. So I gave that 4 stars. And then the last book I gave 4 stars was The Lost Man by Jane Harper. This was just gushed about by Leanne from Literary Diversions. I finally picked it up. And The Lost Man is about a man who lives in the Australian outback, in the desert, and he has died. His body was found, but it's strange because his car was found not so far away, and in his car was, like, obviously shelter from the elements, water, food, like he had everything he needed. And it's very strange that he left the car. And so this follows his brother trying to find out what happened to him. And this was so layered. I will say that it took me a long time to feel invested. I didn't really care about his brother for a good long while, but the atmosphere was so gripping. Like, it really does show how difficult it would be to survive in these climates, and how many people choose to live in these areas or feel like they have no choice but to live in these areas. I ended up really finding it to be twisty-turny, and you know, really discovers and explores family, obviously, and the dark side of people that don't often come to light, or don't necessarily come to light. Yeah, I ended up really enjoying it in the end. So I'll definitely be reading more Jane Harper. Okay, we're gonna move into some 3-star reads. I've only got 2 here. This is The Stranger Diaries by Ellie Griffiths. The Stranger Diaries follows a professor at a school. I don't think it's a boarding school. I think it's just like an elite kind of school, and she teaches English literature. And one of her best friends, who is also a teacher, is found dead. Now, our main character really studies this one author who ended up actually living at the school. And she is writing a whole book about him, and there are some lines from his work that are found next to the dead body. And this is very much an homage to Gothic literature, that is for sure. I think I enjoyed the first half of it more than the second half. The twists at the end I found really disappointing, but I did like the Gothic elements of it. I wasn't blown away in the end. I hate it when you start off on a high with a book and then it just kind of disappoints you over time. I just felt like it was just overly done. You do follow different characters, I will say that. I think if we had followed our main character throughout the whole thing, I would have enjoyed it more. But you follow her, you follow a police detective who is investigating the murder, you follow our main character's daughter, and it just became too much, too many perspectives to make the story work for me. So I ended up giving it 3 stars. It wasn't bad. I loved the homage to Gothic literature for sure. Definitely creepy, but just not quite creepy enough. You guys know me. I like to be properly scared. Another book that I wanted to like so much more than I ended up really liking is Picnic at Hanging Rock by Joan Lindsay. This is an Australian classic. This follows a school, a boarding school, a women's boarding school in the 1900s. It is Appleyard College for young ladies. And these young ladies have planned to have this lovely picnic at Hanging Rock, which is this beautiful place that people far and wide will travel to. It's a real destination spot. So they decide to go and have a little picnic. Everything is in order until I think 3 or 4 of the girls decide to go off on their own and explore a little bit, and they go missing. And it's about the repercussions of that. It's about people back at the actual school itself, wondering what happened to them, trying to find out. It's about the people who were at Hanging Rock that day, that fateful day, and trying to find out what happened to these girls, because it's just, you know, unfathomable that they've gone missing and will not be found. Like, what in the world happened to them? I felt like this was really slow a lot of the time, and this is a short book. It's under 200 pages, but I felt like it was harder to get through than I wanted it to be. I wasn't really excited by the end. It kind of felt meh at the end for me, and it was just okay, in my opinion. It was fine. It was fine, but not something that I'll read again, unfortunately. Okay, we're moving on to the 2-star reads, which is just one. I only have one 2-star read, luckily. But I'm very sad to say I didn't like Survive the Night by Riley Sager. like at all. I will say it was very easy to flip through. It's a thriller. Riley definitely writes thrillers that are easy to read, but this was definitely my least favorite of his books. This follows a young woman named Charlie. She goes to a university and she's really struggling. Her best friend recently died at the hands of a killer, like a serial killer on campus. And she just doesn't think that she can stay at the college without her. She's just struggling in a major way. So she decides to, go to the ride board. This takes place in the 90s, I will say. She goes to the ride board and finds a ride to head home, I think around Thanksgiving. And this guy named Josh decides to go with her. So he is driving. She gets in the car, and as she's driving home, she feels like he's saying some strange things. Maybe he's the killer on campus, and she's trying to survive the night. She is a film student, and at first, all of the film references I found kind of nostalgic, cliche, because they're all of the cliche films that she brings up, all of the cliche directors, and I found it a little bit much, but okay, I could get through that. But one of the things that this whole book really centers on plot-wise is that Charlie has like movies in her mind. She will be driving in a car, and then this movie in her mind will go on, and she imagines that that's actually happened, and she can't really distinguish between that and reality. And so I found that to be a really weak thing to lean on, and I found it to be quite ridiculous. I hated the twists. Like, as the twists came, I was like, oh my gosh, if it's gonna be that, I'm gonna be mad. And I was mad, repeatedly mad, over and over and over again. And I just really didn't like it at all, guys. I am so sad to say it did not work for me at all. So Survive the Night was a no-go for me. And those are all of the books that I ended up reading in July. Let me know in the comments below, what was the best book you read in July and what was the worst book? I can't believe that Survive the Night was the worst book I read in July. Like, did not expect that. Will I continue to read Riley Sager every single summer? Absolutely. It's just like, it wouldn't be summer without Riley Sager for me. Anyway, I hope that you guys are doing well, and I'll see you tomorrow with another video. Bye, guys.